Thank you, Brendan. As he said, my name is Shonda. I am the program director for the David H. Smith Conservation Research Fellowship Program. I am based here at the Society for Conservation Biology, just a few blocks away in Washington, D.C., and I've been doing this for the past 11 and a half years. You might gather from that I like my job, and indeed it is true. It is a lot of fun, and I am very proud and grateful to be at the heart of this network of scientists that I'm really excited to share their story and the story of David Smith and why I think this network is an incredible source of Earth optimism. So the Smith Fellowship has supported 85 fellows since its inception in 1999. These fellows represent a vast diversity now of topical expertise, regional or geographical research coverage, methodology. We have veterinarians, social scientists, ecologists, ecotoxicologists, you name it. And so this breadth of expertise really is an amazing asset when we look at what sort of collective action they can do together. The Smith Fellowship provides 2 years of individual research funding along with professional development in topics like leadership, facilitation, federal policy making, media communications. But perhaps most importantly, though, is this group collective community that's been cultivated by the fellowship program. And if there's one point that I really want to make today, it's that when we look at this from a program funding perspective, creating this community, this network of fellows, really doesn't require much in the way of funding. The vast majority of the program funding goes towards these 2-year individual research projects that are producing short-term outputs, which are fantastic. But where we're really seeing the long-term impact is in the individual career development and the group collective impact that they're having. Let me back it up for a second, though. It's the David H. Smith Conservation Research Fellowship. How many of you, other than my colleagues over there, have heard of David Smith? Not that many. So I'm going to do the hopefully 1 to 2 minute version of David Smith, how he came to conservation, and why his life story really inspires the spirit of the Smith Fellows program. And remember these words, risk taker, entrepreneur, optimist, that were spoken by his wife, who's now the chair of the Cedar Tree Foundation board that funds the Smith Fellows program. So David Smith was a pediatrician, and because he had to be an entrepreneur, not necessarily because he sought to be. David Smith is the reason why children no longer suffer and die from spinal meningitis. Uh-oh, it can't be 10 minutes yet, okay. While David appreciated academic research for its own sake, he was really focused on public health solutions. And so after years of research and fundraising, he and his collaborators developed the vaccine, the Hib vaccine for spinal meningitis. And at this time in the early 80s, though, the pharmaceutical companies really were not interested in preventative measures. They looked at this as a treatable illness. There were already antibiotics on the market that they thought this vaccine would compete with, and so they weren't interested. And so David Smith did, at that time, what was unthinkable, and probably now would be unthinkable as well. He left a tenured chair position at a university teaching hospital, and he started his own company. He had 3 teenage daughters in college. He remortgaged his house several times over. He sold off family antiques, and he got this company, Praxis Biologics, off the ground. And in just the first 10 years of this vaccine being on the market, rates of spinal meningitis dropped from 20,000 in 1987 to just 81 in 1997. That was more than 99%, functionally eradicated it. You might be thinking, that is incredible. What does this have to do with conservation? I am getting there. So conservation was David Smith's second love. Once he sold the company, he and his family bought property out on Martha's Vineyard. You can maybe see up here at the top the Cedar Tree Neck Sanctuary, which is where the name of the family foundation came from. And while he was there, he got involved in conservation, and he really spotted that same gap between science, research, and application in conservation that he had seen in medicine. And so the foundation was established to address that gap. And it provides a lot of small grants, mostly in the area of sustainable agriculture and environmental health. But by far and away, the largest program, and the only one that bears his name, is the Smith Fellows program. And sadly, David Smith, he passed away in 1999 from melanoma, just as the first cohort of Smith Fellows were being selected. But when we say that we're looking for risk takers, entrepreneurs, optimists, solutions-oriented research. It's really, that's where his legacy lives on. And so I stole this slide. Hopefully you can see in these checkmark bullet points here, the risk-taking, the entrepreneurialism, the solutions-oriented. And again, I'll point out, you can look at these and there's really no way to attach a dollar figure to any one of those items. Maybe the skills to work. We do the professional development and that costs a little bit. But the interesting thing about this slide is that I didn't make this. This isn't top down. The fellows made this. I stole this slide from the orientation presentation that's given from the fellows to the new classes of fellows to welcome them. And you'll see they call it a family, and they mean it. It's not just a network. It's a family. And so again, I would love to say that, myself and my executive director set out, 10 years ago to create something like this very intentionally. But I think it's more accurate to say that we probably stumbled upon this, and once we realized what we had, we were like, okay, we want to hang on to this. How do we do that? How do we cultivate it further? And I do have a couple ideas about that. The first is that you gotta pick great people, first and foremost. And so I stumbled upon this on Twitter one day, and I was like, yes, this encapsulates, this is what Smith Fellows are, in a nutshell. And I think sometimes we undervalue the knowing how to have fun as something that's a little bit frivolous, but you can have people that have really great ideas and they're resourceful and they know how to make things happen, but are super difficult to work with. So we try to avoid that. And absolutely, we receive 100 proposals a year, and the initial part of the selection process is very much focused on the scientific merits of these research projects. But when we get to the tail end of that selection process, we really think about picking the person versus the research project, because again, it's the projects that's producing these short-term outputs. It's the people that we're investing in and the community that we're cultivating in that are having the longer-term impact. And the second thing is face time. These sorts of relationships can't be developed via email, via social media, via listservs, via Skype even. And so we do these 3-week-long retreats every year. So each fellow during their 2-year fellowship will get at least 6 of these that they'll attend. But we also invite the alumni to come back. So there's cross-cohort connections being made all of the time. And it's really tempting in these week-long retreats to want to overschedule. Let's have more presentations, more trainings, more panels. But the magic doesn't happen in a meeting room. It happens around a bonfire with a beer at night, or it happens when you pause to have a chat on a hike in the natural world that was, really the inspiration for why a lot of us came to conservation to begin with. So let's not undervalue unstructured time when we get folks together to really build those relationships. And then one of the last things that I want to touch on that fellows work on, again, getting to this collective impact, is the idea of group projects. And again, this isn't something that's top-down dictated by the program. There's an expectation that each cohort or combination of cohorts will produce some sort of group project, but we don't tell them what to work on or how to do it. They come up with this organically themselves. So one such example of this is this policy brief that was done on a microbead ban, which came about. You probably saw this in the news in the past couple of years. And this was led by Chelsea Rockman. She was one of the 2014 fellows who's quickly becoming one of the leading voices on microplastic pollution here in the US. That's her testifying in front of the UN a couple of weeks ago. And she got a couple of classes together and they came up with this policy brief, and they utilized the Society for Conservation Biology as a platform to amplify their voices and put that out there. They did go ahead and publish a paper as well in Environmental Science and Technology. And this figure, 8 billion microbeads are released into US aquatic ecosystems daily, and it got smattered all over the news. And it got kind of picked up by various state legislatures. Chelsea was asked to testify before the California State Assembly. And ultimately, a number of states passed legislation, and it ended up on, the federal legislation ended up on President Obama's desk, and there was a federal ban. And certainly I'm not trying to take, the Smith Fellows credit for all of this, but it was really neat to have them be a part of this snowballing effect in, a good conservation policy issue. Taking group projects to a whole nother level, this is Brett Dixon. He was a 2008 Smith Fellow, and Smith Fellows are found in academia and NGOs and agencies, but Brett really kind of in the spirit of David Smith decided to chuck all of that and start his own organization. So that's Conservation Science Partners. It's networked, it's solutions oriented. He actually hired a number of Smith Fellows, both full-time and part-time, a number of different partners, and they're doing really, really cool things on public lands in the West. They've partnered with Center for American Progress. I'd encourage you to go to that website and check out the interactive maps in the disappearing West. And they were also responsible for the scientific underpinnings in recent national monument designations for like Bears Ears National Monument, Basin Range National Monument. So again, really cool stuff, collective impact, and we really think of Brett as, again, risk taker, entrepreneur, optimist, solutions oriented. I'll breeze through these because I think this is the fodder for discussion later on. This idea of scaling up and networking the networks. The Smith Fellows program interacts with a number of other similar programs with similar goals, increasing the skills and capacity of the world's up and coming scientists. One example I'll mention is the Lieber Aero Fellows program. This was essentially a case where some Canadian funders came to us and said, we really like what you're doing. We'd love to replicate this in Canada. Can you help us? And we said, sure, absolutely. And so they came to one of our retreats. Once they got the program off the ground, we had a joint retreat in the Central Coast of British Columbia, and they are off and going. And it's fantastic. And as opportunities arise, we continue to get these groups together and cross-connect amongst the networks in summer conferences, like the North America Congress for Conservation Biology last year in Madison, and this year's upcoming International Congress for Conservation Biology in Cartagena. And so wouldn't it be cool? That's the last thing I want to think about. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a Smith Fellows-esque program in more countries or in all continents? So again, thank you. I was really, really excited to be here and share the story of David Smith and the Smith Fellows program. It's a network that I'm really happy and proud to be a part of. Thanks.